Good morning and welcome to 365 Days of Stories with Theo Moor. I'm continuing with the legend of the Moor's legacy. Now remember that Perehill had met with the Moor in the marketplace, and he had been discouraged really because the scroll, what good was a scroll? He wasn't into enchantments and he wasn't an enchanter or a magician. So what could he do with the scroll? He couldn't make any use of it at all. And he had gone off with his water carrying, and later that evening he was on his last trip, and he'd gone up to get water at the fountain, and there were a lot of people that were sitting along the benches there. It was a beautiful evening, and the moon was out, as it had been on the evenings preceding, and Perehill, he's filling his jug, and he begins to listen to their conversations like he had never really done before. And many of these people that were sitting there, they weren't well-to-do. And when you're not that well-to-do, of course, you dream of having more. And how do you have more? How can you get more but with wealth? And what easier way to get wealth but find a treasure? And so they were talking about the enchantments and the many places around the Alhambra that were supposedly lost to human view, that were storehouses of wealth that had been cast under enchantment with no way to break through that enchantment in order to discover and procure the wealth. So Perehill is listening, and his mind goes back to the scroll, and that these Arabic symbols that were on the scroll, it was an incantation to break enchantments. And the more he thought about it, the more he thought, well, maybe in fact this is an incredible treasure that gentleman gave me, and I should be quite happy about it. And he went home that night after delivering the rest of that water, and he could hardly rest. He just kept thinking about what it would be like to have riches and to have a changed life because of it. So he didn't really sleep a wink, but I can tell you that first thing in the morning, he was back over in the marketplace and went to the shop of that Muslim and talked to him again. And it was clear that the symbols were an enchantment, and it was clear also that the enchantment would not work without this very special taper or candle. And the Muslim pointed out that it was made of these very special ingredients, and that without that, no matter how often or how long you chanted the symbols, they wouldn't do anything. This time Perehill said, well, you know, I have that taper. Let me go to my house. I'm quite sure I can find it, because that day that he had thrown the box across the room, he had really not cared much for the taper. It just looked like some old thing that wasn't worth anything, as did the scroll. He said, I'll be right back. And so he went as fast as his sturdy legs could carry him back to his home. He searched around, found the taper, and went as quickly as he could back to the Muslim shopkeeper. And the Muslim shopkeeper took the taper in his hands and he smelled it and looked at it. And he was like, yes, this looks like this is the right kind of candle that needs to be lit while the symbols are being chanted. He said, the thing is that while the taper is lit, it supposedly can break through any bolts, any locks, even stone itself. But the minute that taper goes back, all will return to what it was before. And there was not a whole lot of that candle left. Well, the two of them right there decided that they would make their way up to this one tower that was said to be a tower of 7 chambers. Now, the 7 chambers were below ground, and you could only get to the 4th chamber. Beneath that, there were supposedly 3 more. And these 3 other chambers, well, of course, they were guarded by this enchantment. It was not a beautiful place to go. It was quite deserted, rather gloomy. Trees were around it, and they had decided they would go there in the night so as not to be seen. And the other thing is that according to the scroll, the enchantment, well, had to be chanted at midnight. So here off they went. They had taken a lantern with them, but there was light from the waxing moon, and so they made their way to the tower. By the light of that lantern, they descended through the first gloomy staircase. It smelled damp inside, earthy, and as if the air had not moved for a very long time. In that first level, there were vaults, rooms, but all empty. They found a stairway that descended lower to the 2nd level, and they walked through all of those rooms as well. There was nothing. And so they descended 2 more levels to the 4th. And there at the 4th, there was nothing but a bare stone floor. And since it was right around midnight, the Moor asked for the scroll. Perihill lit the taper, and no sooner had he finished very quickly reciting the symbols that were written on the scroll that there was a thunderous crash, and the floor, very close to where they were sitting, opened up. And there in that opening was a stairway that led down. Well, you can imagine they're looking at each other and wondering, okay, what are we getting ourselves into? But they were, like eyes wide open and full of curiosity and filled with a spirit of adventure. They left the taper at the top of the stairs. There was, well, this is the scroll. And down they went with the lantern. Before their eyes, there were 2 men in Moorish garb, sitting, guarding at either end a chest that was bound with 7 iron straps. They were staring blankly into the area in front of them. They were enchanted. They were alive, but were not moving, and took no notice of Perihill and the Moor as they came down the stairs. Now there were vases around this chest, and when Perihill and the Moor went up to these vases, they could see that they were filled with costly gems and jewelry and Moorish gold coins. And they dug their hands into the vase and came up and saw that that's all there was within them. And so they filled as much as they could into their clothing, and they're looking at each other, and at a certain point there was this faint sound, but both of them at the same time, they looked at each other, and they dashed for the staircase and began to run up, because of course they're excited by the treasure, but they know at the same time that written in that scroll is, if that taper goes out, they're done. They're going to be in there forever until somebody else is able to break that enchantment. So they go running up the stairs as quickly as they could. They get to the top and they tumble over the floor, sort of over the top of each other. And as they do, they knock the taper over, and the taper goes out, and whoosh, the floor closes back up. As they're like on the floor looking at each other, just like, oh my gosh. Some of the jewelry, some of the coins had fallen out of their pockets as they had landed on the floor, and they sat there by the light of the lantern right there in that lower vault, and they put everything together and they divvied it up between the two of them. Now the Moor, he had a special liking for gems and jewelry, so he took a little bit more of that. But then Perihill ended up with more of the Moorish gold coins, but he did not go home without beautiful jewelry as well. Now, before they parted, the Moor took Perihill and stood right in front of him. He said, "My friend, we have become incredibly wealthy this night. There is one thing that is extremely important. We cannot share any of this with anybody, nobody. If anybody were to hear of it, it would go badly for us. So nothing can be said. And Perihill, it is important. You cannot even say anything to your wife. Nothing. If she knows, the word is out. And all this wealth that we have gained, one way or another, we will lose it. You know this." Perihill, he nodded in agreement. He knew that it was true. This information, what they'd done, it had to be kept secret. There was a bit of the candle left and the scroll. The two of them decided that they would go back on another night with something more in which to carry off the treasure. And in this way, they would increase their wealth just a bit more. Well, we'll leave the story there. It's the two men, they go up to the open air again, and they make their way off in the direction of their two homes. Let's see what happens next. Okay, thank you for joining. Hope you have a great rest of your day.